Have you heard about the Verenigde Compagnie? Perhaps you know it better by its English name, the Dutch East Indies Company. Officially though, it was the United East India Company. This is because, at the start of the 1600s when the company was founded, the Netherlands as an independent nation did not exist. Side note, much of the history directly involving or related to the Dutch East Indies Company requires context to explain. I may get slightly sidetracked, but it has to do with the East Indies Company. Until 1568, the Netherlands was referred to as the 17th province by the Habsburg ruling family. Their family tree was more like a family wreath as multiple branches joined together. During the life of Charles V of Austria, in 1544, the Habsburgs held dominion over Austria, Bohemia, parts of Hungary, Milan, several German provinces, Sicily, Sardinia, Naples, Spain, and the Burgundian Low Countries, referring to the lands of the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and parts of Germany and France. And by extension, they also controlled much of Latin America through the Spanish crown. After Charles V's abdication due to declining health, the Spanish crown separated from the Austrian crown, officially. Austria retained control over Bohemia, Hungary, and its lands within the German territories. Spain took control of Sardinia, Milan, Sicily, Portugal through Crown Union, small regions in France and the United Provinces, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, referred to as the Spanish Netherlands. With the Spanish control of the United Provinces came the 80 Years' War. In 1568, the United Provinces declared that the King of Spain, Philip II, had broken his oath to uphold their ancient rights and thus was unfit for the crown. The exiled William the Silent of the House of Nassau-Orange led the revolt. In 1581, the Spanish armies were expelled from the Low Countries. They declared the independence of the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands. This is because of the 7 major areas in the lowlands, including Luxembourg, Belgium's 2 regions, and Netherlands' 4 major regions. Despite being a republic of the land, much of the focus was on the Dutch-speaking areas. But back to the war. With much of the land-based fighting done, the Republic formed a company whose job it was to harass the Portuguese and Spanish colonies. The Portuguese were included as they were a part of the Spanish crown until 1640 when the Union fell apart. The Republic declared the Verenigde Compagnie, or the VOC, was to safeguard trade with the East, while also disrupting the Spanish colonies. Spain recognized the Netherlands as a great power in 1609 and signed a treaty that halted conflict until 1619. This is because the 30 Years' War started, a war of Catholicism versus Protestantism. Catholic Spain and the largely Protestant Netherlands went to blows. Not all of the United Provinces were in agreement on faith. The northern regions were largely Protestant while the southern regions were Catholic. That didn't matter yet, as the VOC had set up a lucrative trading system with the Mughal Empire. The Indian kingdom was founded by Babur, son of Timur and grandson of Genghis Khan by his daughter. This empire continued to trade with European countries until 1757 when the British East India Company took de facto control of the subcontinent. For simplicity, I'll refer to the Dutch East India Company as the VOC and the British as the EIC. The VOC mostly traded with the Mughals for silks, textiles, and spices. Spices in particular were a prized commodity in Europe and prior to the circumnavigation of Africa by the Portuguese, as Egyptians had done so before the 1st century, all trade flowed through the Byzantine, then Ottoman Empire. Here's an example. Say you wanted to buy cinnamon powder from a merchant. The only way to get it was for someone in Sri Lanka to harvest the spice and sell it to a Mughal trader. The Mughals would then sell it to the Safavid Empire at an increased price. The Safavid in turn would sell it to the Ottomans at a higher price. The Ottomans would sell to European traders at a further increased price. Then they would sell it to you at whatever price they felt like, because who else would you get it from? Any spice had to flow through these intermediaries if people wished to have access to spices. This is why Christopher Columbus tried to circumnavigate the globe to find a faster route to India. When alternative paths to Asia were found, it was a crippling blow to the Ottomans. The traders, however, were swimming in cash. Aside from trade with the Mughals, the VOC was given a 21-year monopoly on spice trade with Indonesia and Southwest Asia. With this lucrative deal in place meant that the VOC was able to net a hefty profit. According to some estimates, the VOC earnings put it as the most lucrative business ever. In 1637, the company is said to have been worth, adjusting for inflation, between $7 and $8 trillion. The VOC was a publicly owned company and even had shares that the average person could buy. It was the first company to have shares. The beginning of the stock market. In the 1600s, the fledgling United Provinces lacked the manpower to settle major regions as the Spanish, French or English did, so they needed to rely on the Portuguese style of setting up outposts along key trading lines. This is not to say that there were no colonial possessions. Territories west of the 15th degree meridian line after Greenwich were administered by the West India Company, the GWC. East of the 15th degree meridian line after Greenwich was administered by the East India Company, the VOC. The VOC's mission was one of spice and resource transportation because of the Dutch expedition to the East Indies in 1595. The VOC didn't officially exist yet, but this was the predecessor to it. Before the 1600s, the Portuguese Empire held a monopoly of spice as, according to the Treaty of Tordesillas, dividing the world in half along a line 370 leagues off the coast of Cape Verde. Initially defined by Pope Alexander IV, it roughly said that if the land wasn't Christian, then the Spanish and Portuguese had the right to claim the land. East of the line, it belongs to Portugal. West of the line, it belongs to Spain. That's why Spain focused mostly on the Americas and Portugal focused on Asia and Africa. A notable exception was Brazil, which had its easternmost tip on the Portuguese side of the line. This treaty stopped most European countries from colonizing due to it being a papal decree, but eventually, it became a relic and was ignored by most. Having a monopoly on spice meant that the Portuguese could charge however much they wanted. The 17 provinces of the Low Countries made a tidy profit by reselling spices to European lands which they bought from Portugal. That was, until 1578 when Sebastian Aviz died, followed by Cardinal Henry Aviz, his great-uncle. He had no children and passed his crown to his nephew Philip II, of the Spanish crown. Because the mother of Philip II was a Portuguese princess and his father Charles V was the King of Spain, this led to a dynastic union. This meant that when the United Provinces rebelled, trade with the former Portuguese territories ceased. The Dutch ventured to remove the Portuguese from the spice trade and set sail to Indonesia. The Dutch government secretly purchased cartography maps from Petrus Plancius, which revealed the way to Indonesia in 1592. A group of independent merchants formed the Compagnie Vanver, or the Long Distance Company, the father of the VOC. They raised 290,000 guilders for the venture, enough to build 4 ships, the Mauritius, Amsterdam, Hollandia, and the Dutch. As well, 248 men to man the ships. They left the port of Texel in North Holland on the 2nd of April 1595. They were forced to land on Madagascar in October of the same year, losing many to illness. Of the 148, 71 perished. They eventually arrived in Indonesia and were attacked by the Bandung Sultanate. The cost of food and water was inflated to impossible levels thanks to the Portuguese intervention. The situation ended with the remaining men firing on an enemy ship that contained the Bandung prince, priests, and other important figures. Gathering what spices they could, The remaining ships returned with the Amsterdam having to be scuttled due to damage. It's said that they secured 245 bags of pepper, 45 tons of nutmeg, and 30 bales of mace, a nutmeg derivative. Despite seeming like a small amount given the number of ships and men, thanks to the Portuguese, the cost of spices were astronomically high to the point that the long-distance company actually netted a profit. This led to the Dutch government determining that the East Indies would be profitable and creating the VOC. The first trading post established by the VOC was in Bandung, on the island of Java, Indonesia in 1603. This was because the island was an important trading hub for East Asia as it was along important train lines. The British EIC established a trading port in the city in the same year. The VOC set up a headquarters for the area on the Ambon Island from 1610 until 1619. This was due to it being the close proximity to the center of the spices locations in the area. It was, unfortunately, a distance from the trade lines and was eventually moved to a better location. Given that the VOC and the EIC had taken an interest in the area, you'd think that they would carefully divide the area up so each could profit the best without competing, but that's the sensible thing to do, so it didn't happen. The English saw themselves as a great power and would yield to the fledgling Dutch. The United Provinces, de facto ruled by the Dutch, wanted to seize territory from the Habsburgs and establish themselves as a naval power. Neither was willing to concede, and this would eventually lead to conflict. For in fact, more on that later. As the former Portuguese, now Spanish subjects, English and Dutch traders built up trade ports, these were known by unique names. The Portuguese were the first to build these trading areas, and referred to them as vitorias, the English called them factories, the origin of the word. These factories were coastal trade ports with heavy defenses that dominated the area's trade. Now when I said that the English and Dutch were competing in East Asia, I mean they did until 1623. British influence in Indonesia was greatly reduced after an incident known as the Ambona Massacre. This was because the Sultan of Ternate, the island of North Maluku, seemed likely to abandon the Dutch and side with the Spanish. The region's VOC governor, Herman von Spelt, suspected the British forces also located in Ambon were responsible. In February 1623, a Ronin samurai, or wandering warrior, was captured for spying on their fort and in a confession drawn from him. He confessed under torture that other Japanese mercenaries planned to execute Herman von Spelt and capture the fort. Gabriel Towerson, a captain and agent of the EIC, was implicated by the confession as a conspirator. Herman, deciding to nip the conspiracy in the bud, had the EIC members in the area and surrounding islands round up and brought in for interrogation. This interrogation meant forcing a confession through waterboarding. Waterboarding is the process of wrapping a saturated cloth over the subject's face, then having water poured to bring them to almost drowning. With the simplicity of the method, it was the common practice for the VOC to draw a confession. Most of the people confessed to the crime. With the confession, as was required by the Roman-Dutch laws, they could be punished. The Roman-Dutch law was a modified version of the Roman law from just over a millennia ago. With the crime being treason, most of them were executed, but some were pardoned. 4 Englishmen and 2 Ronin. The remaining 20 men were executed. There were 10 English, 9 Ronin, Japanese, and 1 Portuguese. On the 9th of March, 1623, Gabriel Towerson had his head placed on a bike. Of the pardoned Englishmen, they sailed to the VOC capital of Batavia, modern Jakarta. They contacted the EIC, and declared what they said happened. The VOC explained what they said had happened. The EIC demanded the men responsible executed, and the VOC proposed to hold a joint trial. This was denied as they said it would have taken too long. To cut the political stuff, no legal action against the VOC judges were taken. In 1654, Tauerson's heirs received £3,615 from the VOC, equivalent to nearly $133,250 in 2022. The EIC also received £85,000 as compensation, over $3.13 million in 2022. This is according to economic inflation calculations, so possible discrepancies are likely. Just know it was a lot of money. Despite being the United East India Company, they didn't focus exclusively on India and Asia. I stated that the VOC worked on the lands east of the 15th longitude east of Greenwich. This is a rough approximation as no explicit number of given, but roughly lined up to the separation between the VOC territorial area and the GWC territorial area. The coast of West Africa was dotted with trading posts in which local African tribes would sell captured rival tribes or kingdoms in exchange for guns, textiles, or resources not easily accessible to them. The GWC and many Atlantic trading companies took these enslaved people and delivered them to the Americas to sell, then purchase raw materials there and return to Europe. They would then process the raw materials and prepare for a second trip to the African coast to purchase more enslaved to sell to the Americas. This was referred to as the Atlantic Triangle Trade. While the VOC focused mostly on spice, the GWC focused mostly on this triangle trade system. The GWC had several colonial territories from New Amsterdam, now New York, the Dutch Antilles, Suriname, and Guyana, the section of Brazil, and several African ports from Sahara to Angola. Moving back to Africa, I stated that the VOC had territory east of 15 degrees longitude east of Greenwich. This is because, while the GWC had trade ports in Angola, they didn't venture any more east of there. The Cape of Storms, named so by the Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias, was seen as merely as a rest stop by most traders going out from Europe to Asia. Eventually, in 1652, the VOC established Cape Colony, a colonial outpost situated on the Cape of Storms, now known as Cape of Good Hope. Cape Colony was a notable outlier amongst the VOC settlements as it was not a trading port. It was designed to be a rest stop for traders on their way to or from Asia. Beyond the Cape Colony were many African tribes, with the Bantu-speaking people making up the majority of the people in the lands currently. Bantu being linguistic coverall, as 9 distinct groups exist within this context. Bantu holding as much description as describing someone as European or Asian. Within the Bantu classification are the Northern Soto, Southern Ndebele, Southern Soto, Swazi, Tsonga, Swana, Vinda, Xhosa, and Zulu. Odds are if you know any of them it would be the Swazi and Zulu. Swazi mostly living in the lands of Swaziland or Eswatini, and the Zulu from their king Shaka and the Zulu. A great deal of these tribes were nomadic and didn't exist in fixed areas. So as the VOC expanded Cape Colony out, they incorporated the, at the time, empty land. When the tribes claimed they were on their lands, well, might makes right, and out came the guns. The issue was that, while they now had the land, they lacked the people, white people, to use it. This led to people being sent to manage the land. Important side note, in 1648, 2 major wars had just ended. The 80 Years' War between the Spanish and the Dutch, which also saw the Portuguese rebellion in 1640. This saw the Spanish recognize the Dutch government in exchange for the southern Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and various small regions currently a part of the Netherlands. And the end of the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War saw the Protestant nations of the Kingdom of Bohemia, Sweden, Palatinate, Duchy of Savoy, Transylvania, Dutch Republic, Denmark-Norway, Heilbronn League, Hesse-Kassel, Brandenburg-Prussia, and Saxony, against the Catholic Habsburg monarchy, basically Austria, Spanish Empire, Bavaria, and the Catholic League, a confederation of smaller German territories. This was over the matter of faith and saw millions die over what amounted to a "do as you want." This war saw many Germanic-speaking people from the Swiss Confederation, German states, and Scandinavian apply to the VOC, as well were the Huguenots 37 years later. The VOC created contracts stating that they would work for at least 5 years in Cape Colony to help establish the area, not including the 6-month travel time. No return home before the minimum time. These people were referred to as the Vrijburger, or Freeburgers. This influx of learned Protestants led to the Dutch Golden Age of 1588 to 1672. There's a small issue though with Cape Colony: linguistic diversity. Modern South Africa has 11 officially recognized languages, but its predecessor did not. With Dutch, German, Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, French, and a whole slew of other stuff being spoken at the time, a common language was needed. That language was Afrikaans. Afrikaans, with a K and 2A, could be considered a Dutch Creole language. It may also be considered as a dialect. Here's why. Afrikaans was created by taking the Dutch lexicon as a base and then mixing in Malay, Portuguese, African Keko, and other native languages to the areas. I say it's a Creole, which is the hybrid offspring of two languages, but it is also called a dialect because of the majority of the language, up to 95% according to some, is identical to the 17th century Dutch vocabulary. Whatever it was, it allowed for an ease of communication with the people there. When talking about the VOC trading in Asia, most of the attention is on Indonesia as they were the Spice Islands, but more than just those islands exist. The Qing Empire and the Tokugawa Shogunate were the big ones aside from the Mughals. As such, the VOC needed a trading port near them for ease of trade and to disrupt the Spanish activities there. Thankfully, the Portuguese had quote-unquote discovered an island near the Ming mainland in 1544. They called the island Ilha Formosa, or Beautiful Island. This island was populated by many small ethnic groups of fishermen. They were Austronesians, likely being the first place that they settled/originated from around 3000 BCE. Given that they were small groups with a distinct lack of firearms, the Spanish crown claimed Ilha Formosa as Isla Hermosa and set its capital as San Salvador, near the Taiwanese city of Keelung, on the northern section of the island from 1626 to 1642. About a year later, the VOC claimed the southern and most of the western sides of the island, setting their capital in Zeelandia. North of the western part of that Dutch Formosa territory was the Kingdom of Midag, Midewango, or the Kingdom of Diduwango, depending on how you write it, though I'm not sure on why the two names. It was a confederation of possibly 27 villages in the modern territory of Taichung in the Zhejiang district. It is also known as the Cultural City. With the large mountain range running through the middle of the island, much of the interior was unsettled by Europeans. In 1642, the Dutch VOC army took control of the Spanish region and mostly united the area with the Kingdom of Idu retaining its freedom. Yet Dutch hegemony over the island wasn't to last, as the Han Ming Empire was usurped by the Manchurian king. The king invaded Formosa, and following the Battle of Fort Zeelandia and the abandonment of Keelung, the Dutch were out of Formosa. Yet the Kingdom of Midag was able to retain its independence until 1732, when they were forcefully assimilated by the king. Now without their northerly trading post, the VOC moved to their other trading partner, the Tokugawa Shogunate. Formal trade relations were established in 1609, and the Edict of Shikoku was written in 1635, which limited all European trade to the port of Nagasaki. More accurately, the artificial island of Dejima, or the Exit Island. During the Edo period, This was the only official place that trade between foreigners and Japanese could take place. Unofficially, trade with foreigners existed beyond the island, but was punished. Much of the trade was textiles and fabrics in the early years, before gradually shifting to foreign writings and inventions, items that were unseen by most Japanese. Sugar quickly rose to prominence given its sweetness and rarity to the island nation. The VOC, in turn, purchased rare metals, lacquered items, camphor powder, rice, and porcelain items. This flow of foreign writings led to the beginning of the Rangaku or Dutch learning. This continues until 1854 when the USA rolled up to Japan with gunboats and demanded that they open up to trade. But what happened? If the VOC was trading valuable goods on such a scale, why isn't it around? What happened to this massive company? Short answer: war. More specifically, the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War. War is expensive, and war that actively involved one of the largest empires in the world would be more costly. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War took place because they decided to trade with the revolting 13 colonies. They did so not out of a desire to aid the colony, but to weaken the English, as the French did. Yet, as it happened with the French, the Dutch Republic was dealt a financially crippling blow. The English won the Fourth War and saw the relinquishing of Dutch territory in India. The VOC was devastated by the British Navy, barely clinging to life. Lasting just until the end of 1799 before formally ending. Attempts were made to reorganize it, but that was cut off by a small issue known as the Napoleonic War. The Netherlands was conquered and reorganized as the Batavian Republic, a French client state. With this conquest, the English swooped in and took quote-unquote temporary control over their colonial possessions. When the war was over, the English returned what they didn't want to keep. With the remains of the VOC, the new Kingdom of the Netherlands, the successor of the United Provinces, reorganized the territory as the Dutch East Indies. This territory was the name given to the modern lands of Indonesia, and was administered by the government. The territory in the 1800s was mostly limited to Java and Moluccan, and continued to expand. In the 1830s they partially expanded into Sumatra, before taking major control over the island and partially expanding into Borneo. By the 1920s, they completely took control over the islands from Sumatra to New Guinea. The Dutch East Indies were administered by the Dutch Kingdom until 1942 with the Japanese occupation. Even after the Allied victory, the Dutch control over the Indies was barely existing. The Japanese stoked independence movements before they were defeated and led to roughly 4 years of rebellion. It ended with the Dutch-Indonesian Round Table Conference on the 2nd of November, 1949. The Dutch government signed a document recognizing the Indonesian government in The Hague. The document took effect on the 27th of December, 1949. With the Republic of Indonesia taking control over the lands, the Dutch East Indies and the VOC had finally died. So what happened to the VOC? For a corporation that at one point was the largest ever, how did it fall? It died 1,000 small cuts before finally dying. The veins were cut by the English, the heart stolen by the French, and the blood stolen by the Japanese. The VOC existed to transport valuable materials to Europe. With massive ships transporting once rare commodities, the profit margins of the items had fallen. The company existed as a time-sensitive one. With spices and ceramics being rarities for Europeans, there existed a large profit to be made. Yet as it became easier to transport resources, with the Suez Canal in 1859 and the Panama Canal in 1904, and ships growing larger to carry the goods, the profit to transport each item fell to the point where it became clear that it could not last. The Dutch East Indies can have only existed in the time it had due to dozens of situations that permitted the company to profit. The costs to transport these items were the cornerstone of the company. With the decreased price of them, it was a crippling issue. If the British fleet had not destroyed many of the Dutch ships, the company would have eventually collapsed from the United Provinces falling to the French Emperor. All we can do is marvel at what once was and what it meant. Anyway, I've been the Irish Explainer, and this has been a brief rundown on the VOC and the surrounding topics. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to place them in the comments below. Let me know what I should cover next. Have a great day and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.